Hello everyone and welcome to Makai-World Reviews. I am DeComposter, a master of minds and of men. We finish up March on time. Who would have guessed I had it in me to do what 10-year-olds can do? We finish up mockumentary month with one that isn't quite a comedy, but is hardly as serious as Man Bites Dog, where we look at the absolute mouthful of Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon. My God, what a title. Well, let's put on our masks and get to it. The title of the movie, as I said, is Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon, directed and co-written by Scott Glosserman. Well, he did this, a documentary on Wikipedia, and a made-for-TV MTV film. So yeah, some career. Also co-written by David J. Strive. Nothing of note to say about this guy. He has a few movies he wrote that haven't come out yet, so okay. Starring Nathan Basile. He's had a brief career, seemingly starting late in life, mostly in the TV realm, with things like CSI, Numbers, and Cold Case. And Angela Goethals, mostly a theater actress of some note in certain circles, but has had a more significant career than anyone else we've talked about thus far, was in Jerry Maguire, 6 Feet Under, 24, the usual Law & Order stuff, CSI, etc. The release date for this was March 12, 2006, what came out around the same time. Failure to launch. During the period of time, Matthew McConaughey figured he would phone it in, and he does, with Sarah Jessica Parker and inexplicably Terry Bradshaw's help. And Green Street Hooligans, an incredibly stupid but undeniably entertaining movie with Elijah Wood and Charlie Hunnam as soccer hooligans. Not much else to say about it. Moving over to the plot, so Taylor and her friends are doing a college documentary about legendary slashers, a la Jason, Michael Myers, etc. And there just happens to be one in their hometown of Glen Echo, Maryland, a Leslie Vernon, who was supposedly a boy that was killed as a child after being possessed by a demon or the devil or whatever, and has come back to get his revenge against teenagers. Leslie is a very unassuming late 20-something man who is more than happy to tell and show them all about his interests, which include reading mechanical handbooks, magic and sleight of hand, turtles, and planning his big murder. He shows them his intended victims, dubiously aged high schooler Kelly, who he just knows is a virgin. He also shows them the supposed house he lived in during his previous life, and all the tricks and traps he has laid out there for the big night, which is upcoming. We also meet another killer, though retired, one Eugene, and he's pleasant enough talking about murder theory with Leslie and Taylor over dinner. Shortly after, the first part of Leslie's plan is enacted, where he kills a librarian to taunt Kelly, though he is interrupted by one Doc Halloran, who tells the group Leslie is just a garden-variety mental patient. This doesn't really dissuade the group from continuing with their documentary, and they push forward to the showdown. Though before it can continue, Taylor gets cold feet and ends the documentary prematurely, wanting to help the supposed teens. Well, after a series of convoluted events, we find Kelly is not the virgin, Taylor is. A few people are killed, but in the end, it's the virgin and final girl, Taylor, who takes out Leslie and burns his old homestead. But of course, during the credits, it's revealed Leslie is alive. Hooray? Alright, as we do, starting off with directing. Now, I've always said a director's main job is getting people that are right for the job and getting them to understand that job. However much or little the director desires, really. This director, Scott Glosserman, did not understand this job. This movie feels schizophrenic. It feels like he wants to preach at you about his feelings on horror and what's wrong with it, and how much he loves it, but also making a compelling horror story. And that can be done because Scream has done it several times before this movie came out, and in the coming years, both Cabin in the Woods and Dale and Tucker vs. Evil accomplished the goal of satirizing horror while making it interesting. But here, it fails fundamentally because it doesn't know how to execute its simplest task, deciding what kind of movie it is. It first off fails as a documentary-style movie, since that it abandons that for the entire third act, making the Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon title not really making any sense in universe. The purpose of a mockumentary is that someone is watching this. It's a documentary. It is being watched. It has been filmed, edited, and processed for enjoyment. I'll compare this to the 3 movies I watched this month. What We Do in the Shadows is about vampires living together, preparing for a ball, and some slice-of-life stuff. It shows all of that and has an epilogue. It has presented as something you could watch on a New Zealand public access channel. Man Bites Dog shows Benoit, a much more compelling murderer than Leslie, and his exploits. And I theorize that the footage was edited together post-death of the director and everyone else in the movie, and that makes sense in no regard. And Best in Show is like the Westminster Dog Show low-effort documentary on some of its contestants. The form works for all of those. This is how those movies are presented. This is a college documentary on a murderer, but a lot of the footage doesn't make any sense from a narrative standpoint, and it falls out entirely because we get no resolution in the film. How are we seeing any of this before it changes to a boring, bare bones, paint-by-the-numbers, mediocre horror films? And there were scenes where Leslie is talking and we see his events of what's happening, like one of the endings of Clue. How are we supposed to see that in the documentary? How are we supposed to have seen that? It was just lazy. The characters weren't interesting or uninformed, had some boring fan service with cameos, and I didn't really get the difference that they make between generic spree or serial killers and supernatural murderers. And they don't seem to know the difference either, since it is never addressed, but both things are brought up. This was some slapdash directing, amateur at best. Scott wants to tell you that he's seen a lot of horror movies, and he has met people from those horror movies because he hired them for his horror movie. Good for you. As far as Cine goes, it was basic at best. It didn't do the camera work for the docu part particularly well because a number of the shots didn't make any sense for a camera guy to be doing. Then it turns from that to just basic camera work. It didn't do anything compelling or interesting with either one of those. It was really film school 101 kind of stuff here. It tried to play with filters and shaky cam work and whatnot, but it didn't land. The lighting was just the same, perfectly fine, serviceable for what it was. The sets, well, these were halfway decent, pretty good. I liked that we got a wide variety of sets to kind of see everyone interacting, though they did woeful little with any of it. They did look a bit sterile, but we never linger enough in one place to really give it too much thought, and a good portion of that has to be budget issues, so I'm not going to harp on that too much. As far as the story, as a concept, I enjoy the concept of potentially seeing behind the walls of a Jason-type murderer. But that isn't what we got. We got a guy who thinks he's a Jason-type character, and that would be acceptable if the movie didn't also tell us characters like Jason, Freddy, and Michael Myers are real. So we know supernatural and supernaturally autistic-type characters exist, but we don't get to see that. In fact, little is explored before they find out Leslie isn't Leslie. We get nothing about the nature of his supposed resurrection and demonic powers that he doesn't really have anyway, so what's the difference? Really, we get this insufferable twat, and not insufferable in, oh, he's a killer, a miserable cunt like Benoit. Just a garden variety douche. I'll get more into Leslie in a little bit, but it's difficult to care here since the story isn't very consistent in what it's telling us. We are told Leslie is this genius that has everything planned out, yet he needs help from Eugene to figure out simple details like killing someone Kelly knows, and his way of stalking a girl is throwing a brick at a back door. It was cool to see some of the tricks of the trade being explained, like how Leslie sets his traps or gimmicks, the weapons and whatnot, how he gimmicks up the weapons. But we got no real insight into the supernatural type killer character or regular killer character for that matter. I mentioned the whole documentary part is fairly well dropped, so it's rendered moot. The Kelly stuff was a red herring, which there were 2 times in this movie people didn't know simple phrases like red herring and Ahab, obviously referring to an intended misdirection and an obsession, respectively. I know what a red herring was when I was a kid watching a pup named Scooby-Doo. It just came off as kind of stupid. I also want to point out 2 moments I would have changed. I would have changed a lot, but 2 parts I thought could improve the movie in some fashion. The part where Leslie is telling Taylor about his plan, and we see his ideas of how the night will go. I'd have loved if it said something about it being a dramatic recreation. It was like people from their school recreating this idea that he's giving, or the camera guys or whatever. Would have been a clever way to use that and to explore the documentary part of it. If you have to leave that section at all, I'd probably cut it, but I thought that would be nice if you wanted to leave it in. And Eugene. Now, I'm not going to say this for the character section, as he's barely a character, but could have been used so much better. Scott Wilson, God rest his soul, was a damn fine actor. He had a long and slightly understated career, but he was good here. His character is a retired spree murderer, serial killer, something of some description. And once again, him presenting Freddy and Jason as the likes of him doesn't make a ton of sense, but whatever. He's presented as retired, but still keeping up with staying in fighting shape. And he even gets kind of mad about Leslie when Leslie says, oh, he's retired. But why not use that story? Instead of have Leslie being this genius master manipulator, sees all the angles which no one buys, have Eugene be the one helping him. Why do all of this set up with Eugene to let this character go unused? Seems like Leslie is everywhere because he has help. Eugene and possibly Eugene's wife, they're wearing masks. Leslie wears a mask, so why not have them all wear masks? It seems like they don't know what's going on. I don't know. As far as characters, first off, Everyone looked way older than what they were supposed to, but that's pretty common and just a general complaint I have about a lot of things. But let's talk about Leslie. Mentioned he's an insufferable twat, and that stands, but he's also a bland, boring, fishy white. He's unathletic, which doesn't help that they show him doing some of the worst kicks and punches I've ever humanly seen. Comparing him to other movie killers doesn't work because they had a gimmick that worked. Jason was a giant, unstoppable, undead monster. Freddy was a monstrous-looking creature of your mind. This is just a thin guy with a really stupid mask and costume, a forgettable weapon, and no gravitas to him. They try to make him menacing, and it doesn't work. I'm sorry if I'm being too hard on Nathan Beale, but this ain't it, brother. I hope better for your career. Everyone else, sans Eugene, were forgettable, too forgettable. The most notable thing is that Kelly, the original non-virgin virgin, is really tall and it stood out. Kate Lang Johnson, who played her, is a model, and I would have guessed she has to be with that height and look. I wanted to like Taylor, but she was more memorable in the 20 seconds that she was in Home Alone than she was in this. Robert Englund, Kane Hodder, and Zelda Rubinstein were all in this. They tried to give Robert something to do, but meh. Good to see all of them, however little it was. As far as the soundtrack, it was good, genuinely. They used only a little music in the documentary part, and it was well done and atmospheric, and they kept that up after turning it to the regular movie. I thought, while it was fairly generic horror movie music, helped present the movie in a better light, and I also rather liked the use of Psycho Killer by the Talking Heads. Overall, it may seem like I was extra harsh in this movie. I just think it tries to be more clever than it is. It feels like this script started out with actually, and then a dissertation on horror movie theory before dissolving into a movie that was thought out in one afternoon. But saying that, it wasn't a bad movie. Not really by any stretch was it bad. It was just mediocre, sloppy. It negated its own premise. It was, as I said, amateur hour, or amateur 92 minutes, that is. I wouldn't watch this movie again, and I got very little from watching it the first time. If you want to watch a movie about satirizing horror movies, I mentioned Scream, Dale and Tucker vs. Evil, and Cabin in the Woods. Now, those later two came out a number of years after this, so maybe I can give a little props to this movie for having some kind of inspiration there, but I certainly won't be recommending it. Well, that was a laborious Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon. What is your favorite horror movie mask? Can it get any better than the original Leatherface? Let me know down below. Also, come back next week, where in the month of April, I'm looking at movies with William Sadler in it. You might not know the name, but it gives me the opportunity to talk about movies I may not otherwise get to talk about. We're going to start with Tales from the Crypt, Demon Knight. Also, please like, subscribe, add me on Instagram under DemonPeaks for Twin Peaks memes, and don't forget, I'm the only demon who loves you. Thank you, and goodbye.